The dog was already losing her grip, but she still held a child's red glove above the water. Snow moved sideways through the pines outside Bozeman, Montana, turning the forest road into a pale blur beneath a hard gray sky. Staff Sergeant Mason Reed had been checking storm barriers along an old maintenance route when he heard the sound. Not a bark, not a cry, a faint scraping beneath the wind, metal against stone, then silence. Mason stopped beside his utility truck and listened again. He was 38, white, broad-shouldered, with short dark brown hair touched by gray at the temples and blue-gray eyes trained to notice what did not belong. The temperature had fallen to 12 degrees, and every breath left him in a cloud. He followed the sound past a leaning fence and through knee-deep snow until the trees opened around an abandoned stone well. Frost covered the rim. A broken wooden cover lay half-buried nearby. Mason stepped closer and aimed his flashlight down. Two amber eyes looked up from the darkness. A female German shepherd clung to a narrow shelf of ice several feet below, her black and tan coat soaked flat against her body. Her front paws scraped weakly against the frozen stone. The rest of her hung in black water. Between her teeth, lifted above the surface, was a small red glove. "Easy, girl," Mason said. His voice stayed low, even though his pulse had begun to hammer. The dog did not bark. She only watched him, breathing in short, thin bursts. Mason reached for his radio and called in the location, then opened the rear compartment of the truck. He took out a tow strap, a maintenance rope, 2 wooden planks, and a folding ladder. He did not climb into the well. The ice along the rim was unstable, and one careless move could put them both in the water. Instead, he anchored the tow strap to the truck hitch, laid the planks across the snow to spread his weight, and lowered a looped rope toward the dog. "I need you to trust me." The German shepherd turned her head slightly, still holding the glove. Mason lowered the rope until it brushed her shoulder. She tried to move, slipped, and struck the water with a soft splash. The glove remained clenched in her mouth. "Hold on." Mason tightened the line and guided the loop beneath her chest. His fingers had begun to lose feeling inside his gloves, but he worked slowly. No sudden pulls. No sharp commands. The dog's eyes stayed on him. When the loop finally settled behind her front legs, Mason braced one boot against the plank and pulled. The rope tightened. Ice cracked along the inner wall. The German shepherd rose several inches, then slid back. Mason adjusted the angle and pulled again, using the truck hitch as leverage. This time, her paws reached the rim. He caught the thick fur at her shoulders and dragged her onto the snow. She collapsed beside the well, shaking so hard her collar rattled. The red glove fell from her mouth at last. Mason dropped to one knee and wrapped his heavy coat around her body. "You kept that dry for someone." The dog's eyes opened slightly. She placed one paw over the glove. Mason looked at it more closely. Child-sized. Red wool. A small white star stitched near the thumb. His attention shifted to the dog's collar, a worn strip of red leather stiff with ice. A metal tag had frozen against the buckle. He could make out only one letter beneath the frost. S. The German shepherd tried to lift her head toward the trees. Her body failed her, but her gaze did not. She was not looking for shelter. She was looking back the way she had come. Mason slid one arm beneath her chest and the other beneath her hindquarters. She was lighter than she should have been, cold and trembling against him. "We are going to get you warm." He carried her toward the truck, then paused when she gave a weak whine. Her eyes had fixed on the red glove still lying in the snow. Mason went back, picked it up, and tucked it beneath the edge of his coat beside her. Only then did she relax. As he placed her inside the heated cab, Mason understood the first truth of that morning. The dog had not fallen into the well while wandering. She had been trying to return to someone, and whatever waited beyond those trees was small enough to wear that glove. Mason kept the truck heater running at full strength as he drove toward town, one hand steady on the wheel and the other resting near the German shepherd without touching her. She lay across the passenger seat beneath his coat, the red glove tucked against her chest. Every few minutes, her eyes opened and turned toward the rear window, as if the road behind them mattered more than the warmth ahead. Snow struck the windshield in soft bursts. The wipers pushed it aside, but the forest disappeared almost as quickly as it returned. Mason glanced at the frozen tag on her collar. Only the first letter remained visible beneath the ice. S. He had seen enough to know the dog carried more than identification. She carried urgency. The memory came before he could stop it. Years earlier, during a winter search in northern Idaho, Mason had helped lead a team looking for a missing child after a storm closed the back roads. They had followed procedure. They had waited for better visibility. They had checked each marked route in order. By the time another team found the child, Mason had already learned a lesson he never forgot. A map could tell you where people were supposed to be. It could not tell you where fear had sent them. No one blamed him. That did not quiet the feeling that had followed him home. Since leaving the Marine Corps, Mason had taken the road maintenance job because the work was simple. Clear the path. Repair the barrier. Mark what was unsafe. Rhodes did not ask whether he had acted soon enough. The dog shifted beneath the coat and gave a faint whine. Mason lowered the heater one setting. You are still with me. Her ears moved at his voice. When he reached the edge of Bozeman, he called ahead to Carter Veterinary Clinic. Dr. Evelyn Carter met him at the side entrance with 2 technicians and a rolling table covered in warm blankets. Mason carried the German Shepherd inside. The clinic smelled of antiseptic, wool, and coffee. Evelyn worked quickly but calmly, checking the dog's temperature, breathing, paws, and eyes. Severe hypothermia, she said. But her heart is steady. Mason placed the red glove beside the table. The dog's gaze followed it immediately. Evelyn noticed. That hers? No. Too small. One technician wrapped warm towels around the dog's body while another started fluids. The German Shepherd remained still until Mason reached for the glove. Then one paw lifted weakly. Easy, he said. I am not taking it. He placed it near her muzzle. She relaxed. Evelyn examined the collar. Leather is frozen solid. She used warm compresses around the buckle and waited for the ice to soften. Mason stood near the end of the table, his wet clothes beginning to steam in the heat. There may be a name on the tag. There is something, Evelyn said. But we do not rush this. The dog's breathing slowed. Her eyes closed. For several long minutes, the room held only the quiet hiss of the heater and the soft clink of metal instruments. Mason stared at the red glove and the stitched white star near the thumb. A child had chosen it. A child had worn it. Somewhere beyond the road closure, someone might still be waiting for the dog to return. Evelyn finally freed the tag from the buckle and wiped away the melting frost. The stamped letters appeared one by one. S. Turner. Mason felt his pulse change. Evelyn turned the tag over. A phone number had been engraved beneath the name. Before she could read it aloud, the German Shepherd opened her eyes. At the sound of the name Turner, she tried to lift her head. She knows it, Mason said. Evelyn reached for the clinic phone. I will call. The first number rang without answer. The second went to voicemail. Mason looked at the dog. There has to be more. Evelyn examined the collar again and ran her thumb along the inner seam. You may be right. A small section of the leather was thicker than the rest, stitched by hand and protected beneath a narrow flap. She pressed lightly against it. Something thin shifted inside. The German Shepherd gave a weak sound and looked toward the red glove. Mason understood. The name on the tag was only the beginning. Whatever waited inside the collar had been placed there for the moment the dog came back alone. Evelyn did not cut the collar immediately. She warmed the leather first, pressing a clean towel against the thickened seam until the stiffness eased. Mason stood close enough to see the dog's eyes follow every movement. The German Shepherd was still weak, but something in her had changed. She was no longer drifting in and out of sleep. She was waiting. There, Evelyn said. A hidden pocket. She used a small seam tool to lift 2 loose stitches. Inside was a narrow, waterproof sleeve, folded twice and sealed with clear tape. Mason held his breath as she opened it. The first line was written in careful block letters. Sophie Turner, age 9. The second line listed a phone number and Rachel Turner as emergency contact. Beneath that, in a child's handwriting, were 6 words. Willow knows the old ranger station. Mason looked at the dog. Willow. Her ears lifted. One paw moved against the blanket. Evelyn read the final note. If Willow is alone, follow her. The clinic became very quiet. The red glove lay beside Willow's muzzle, damp but no longer frozen. Mason touched the stitched white star with one finger. This belongs to Sophie. Evelyn nodded, and Willow was trying to get back to her. Mason reached for his phone and called Deputy Hannah Brooks, the county officer coordinating storm closures. She answered on the second ring. Reed, what have you got? A recovered German Shepherd named Willow. Female, about 6 years old. She was trapped in an abandoned well off Forest Route 9. Her collar identifies a missing child, Sophie Turner, age 9. The tone on the other end changed at once. Rachel Turner reported Sophie and the dog missing last night. Their vehicle was found near Pine Hollow Road just before dawn. Mason looked at Willow. Was Sophie in it? No. Rachel was picked up by a passing driver after leaving the vehicle to find help. She thought Sophie stayed inside with Willow. By the time deputies reached the car, both were gone. Mason closed his eyes for half a second. Then we have been looking in the wrong place. Hannah was silent, listening. What do you mean? Willow came from the east side of the old maintenance route. The ranger station is in the opposite direction from the vehicle. That area is outside the current grid. Then the grid is wrong. Evelyn glanced at Mason, but did not interrupt. Hannah exhaled slowly. The storm is still active. Visibility is poor. I can redirect one team, but I need something more than a note. Mason looked at the hidden sleeve. The note was made for exactly this situation. Sophie's name, her age, the station, the dog's behavior. That is more than enough. Willow tried to rise. Her front legs trembled, and Evelyn steadied her gently. At the sound of Sophie's name, the dog turned toward the clinic door. Mason stepped closer. She wants to go. Evelyn shook her head. She is not ready for a search. Neither is Sophie. The words came out quieter than Mason intended. He knew the danger of moving too fast. He also knew the cost of waiting for certainty that might never come. Evelyn studied him for a moment, then looked at Willow. She cannot run. She does not have to. She only has to point us in the right direction. Hannah returned to the line. I am sending a unit to the clinic. We will check the vehicle first, then work outward. Mason glanced at the red glove. Do not start at the vehicle. Start at the well. Why? Because that is where Willow's road stopped. Sophie's did not. Willow lowered her nose to the glove and gave a soft whine. Mason understood the shape of the story now. Sophie had reached safety somewhere beyond the trees. Willow had left to find help. On the return path, she had fallen into the well and nearly vanished beneath the ice. The dog had not failed to come back. She had been interrupted. Mason placed the glove beside the hidden note and looked toward the window, where snow moved in pale sheets across the parking lot. Years ago, he had trusted the marked search grid more than a weak signal in the storm. He would not make that choice again. Keep her warm, he told Evelyn. I am going back. Willow looked at him. Mason touched the collar where Sophie's message had been hidden. You brought us this far, he said. Now show me where the rest of the road begins. Hannah arrived at the clinic 20 minutes later in a county utility vehicle fitted with snow chains, followed by a volunteer search truck carrying 2 deputies and a medic. Mason had already changed into dry gloves and a heavier coat borrowed from the clinic supply room. Willow remained on the treatment table beneath warmed blankets, her eyes fixed on the door. Evelyn stood beside her with one hand resting near the red collar. She can ride, Evelyn said, but she cannot walk far. Mason nodded. She will not have to. Together, they lifted Willow onto a padded stretcher and secured it in the rear of Hannah's vehicle. The red glove was placed beside her front paws. The moment the engine started, Willow raised her head and looked toward the east. Hannah noticed. That is the direction of the well. And beyond it, Mason said, the old ranger station. Snow covered the road in long white ridges. Visibility shifted between 100 feet and almost nothing as wind moved through the valley. Hannah drove slowly, following Mason's maintenance markers until the forest closed around them. When they reached the abandoned well, the search team spread out in a careful line. The broken cover, tow strap, and disturbed snow remained where Mason had left them. Willow was carried from the vehicle and placed on a thick blanket near the truck. At first, she only watched. Then Mason brought the red glove close to her nose. Willow inhaled, turned her head south, and gave one low whine. Hannah unfolded a topographic map across the hood. The ranger station is southeast. Mason studied the tree line. Then why is she pointing south? One deputy checked the ground near the well. Tracks are nearly gone. The snowfall had softened every edge, but Mason saw something the others missed. A shallow break in the crust. Then another. Small impressions spaced close together, leading away from the well. Those are not willows, he said. Hannah moved closer. Child-sized. The tracks continued south for nearly 50 yards before disappearing beneath fresh snow. The main search grid lay northeast, toward the stranded vehicle. For a moment, procedure pulled one way and the dog's signal pulled another. Hannah looked at Mason. We can divide the team. He shook his head. Not enough people, and the storm is getting worse. Then choose. Mason looked at Willow. The German Shepherd had pushed herself upright despite the blankets. Her front legs trembled, but her nose remained pointed south. The memory of Idaho returned. The porch light. The marked route. The belief that a line on paper knew more than a frightened person in weather like this. Mason folded the map. We follow the dog. Hannah held his gaze for 1 second, then radioed the decision. The medic secured Willow in a low rescue sled so she could be pulled without walking. Mason took the lead rope. The team moved south through the trees, keeping close to the maintenance trail where the ground rose above the deeper drifts. Willow watched every turn. At the first fork, she whined and leaned left. At the second, she lifted one paw toward a narrow opening between two pines. Mason followed. Mason freed it carefully. It matched the child's glove. Scarf, Hannah said, or part of a coat. Willow touched her nose to the fabric and gave a sharper sound. The team continued. Snow thickened around their boots. The forest grew quieter, the wind blocked by the slope. Then the trail opened onto an old service road. Ahead, partly buried beneath snow, stood Rachel Turner's vehicle. Its rear door was open. The child's safety seat was empty. A small backpack lay on the floor. Hannah checked inside while Mason examined the ground. No sign she stayed here, Hannah said. One deputy pointed toward a set of disturbed branches east of the road. Tracks led out that way. Everyone turned toward the ranger station. It was the logical direction. Willow did not. Mason stood. She left markers. Hannah followed his gaze. Another strip of blue fabric could be seen farther along the fence, then another near the trees. Sophie had not wandered blindly. She had marked her path. The trail did not lead toward the vehicle or directly toward the station. It curved around a frozen creek where the main road had become impassable. Mason looked at Willow. You were bringing us to her route, not the destination. The German Shepherd's ears lifted. The first answer had been the car. The second had been the station. Both were incomplete. Sophie was somewhere between them, following a safer path only Willow remembered. Mason tightened his grip on the sled rope. We stay with her. This time, no one questioned him. The team turned west, following the blue markers into the snow. The blue markers led away from the service road and into a stand of lodgepole pines where the snow lay deeper, but the wind had less reach. Mason pulled the rescue sled carefully, keeping Willow level while Hannah and the deputies followed in single file. Each strip of fabric appeared just before the last one disappeared from view. Sophie had tied them low, close to a child's height, using fence wire, branches, and broken shrubs as guides. She planned this, Hannah said. She was trying to make sure someone could follow. Mason looked down at Willow. Someone did. The German Shepherd's eyes remained fixed ahead. Every few minutes, she lifted her nose and tested the air. The red glove stayed between her paws beneath the blanket. After another quarter-mile, the trail reached a shallow ravine where snow had drifted over a narrow footbridge. The bridge railing was still visible, but the path across had vanished. One blue strip hung from a branch on the opposite side. Mason stopped the team. We do not cross until we know the boards will hold. One deputy used a trekking pole to test the surface. The first boards were solid. The center bowed slightly under pressure, but did not break. Hannah secured a safety line between two trees. Mason clipped the rescue sled to it and moved one step at a time. Willow stayed still, trusting the pull of the rope. Halfway across, she raised her head and gave a sharp whine. Mason stopped. Beneath the snow near the far railing, something red showed through. He brushed it free. A child's knit cap. The inside was dry. She crossed before the worst of the snowfall, he said. Hannah looked toward the trees beyond the bridge. Then she may have reached shelter. On the other side, the blue markers continued uphill. The slope was gradual but long, and the team's breathing grew louder in the cold air. Willow watched every turn from the sled. At a fork between two game trails, she pushed herself upright and looked left. Mason saw faint marks in the snow, too soft to be clear footprints, but one impression showed the edge of a small boot. He pointed. That way. The ranger station should have been east. This trail curved northwest. Hannah checked the map again. There is an old fire lookout cabin above the ridge. It is not marked on current maps. Mason remembered the maintenance records. The roof was repaired 5 years ago. It may still be dry. Willow gave another whine. The team increased its pace. Trees thinned near the top of the ridge, revealing a small wooden cabin almost hidden beneath snow. One shutter hung crooked. A narrow line of smoke rose from the metal chimney, faint but real. Mason's chest tightened. She made a fire. Hannah raised her radio. Possible location found. Stand by. They approached without shouting. Mason did not want to frighten whoever was inside. He stopped at the door and knocked 3 times. Sophie Turner? My name is Mason Reed. We are here to help. Silence answered. Willow tried to rise from the sled. Mason loosened the strap around her shoulders. She stepped down unsteadily, took 2 slow steps, and pressed her nose against the bottom of the door. From inside came the smallest sound. A scrape, then a child's voice. Willow. The German shepherd's whole body changed. Her ears lifted. Her tail moved once beneath the blanket draped across her back. Mason opened the door carefully. Warm air touched his face, carrying the smell of smoke, wet wool, and pine resin. Sophie sat near a small iron stove, wrapped in an old ranger coat several sizes too large. Her dark hair was tucked beneath another blanket, and one boot had been removed so she could warm her foot. Beside her lay dry branches, a box of matches, and the second red glove. She stared at Willow as though the rest of the room had disappeared. You came back, she said. Willow crossed the floor slowly. Sophie dropped to her knees and wrapped both arms around the dog's neck. Mason turned his head for a moment, giving them privacy. Hannah entered with the medic, who began checking Sophie's temperature and asking simple questions. I waited like my dad taught me, Sophie said. I tied pieces of my scarf so Willow could find the way. Mason crouched nearby. She did more than find the way. She brought us to it. Sophie looked at the red glove beneath Willow's paw, then at the one beside the stove. She would not leave without that. Mason smiled faintly. Neither would she. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but the search had ended. Inside the cabin, Sophie held Willow close while the dog finally stopped looking toward the door. The medic wrapped Sophie in a thermal blanket and checked her hands, feet, and breathing while Hannah radioed the search command with the good news. Mason stayed near the cabin door, listening to the storm move over the roof in softer waves. Willow lay beside Sophie with her head across the girl's knees, the blanket still draped over her back. Every time the medic reached for Sophie's arm, the German shepherd lifted her eyes, then relaxed when the girl spoke. It is okay, Willow. The cabin was small but dry. An old iron stove gave off enough heat to keep the room above freezing, and Sophie had used fallen branches stored beneath the porch to feed it. A metal cup sat near the stove with melted snow inside. Mason looked at the careful arrangement and felt something close to awe. You did everything right, he said. Sophie lowered her gaze. I was scared. Being scared does not mean you did it wrong. She looked at Willow. She kept trying to leave. To find help. Sophie nodded. I told her to go back to the road. I thought Mom would be there. Mason crouched beside them. She found the well instead. Sophie's arms tightened around Willow's neck. The dog leaned closer, as if apologizing for a road she had never chosen. Mason picked up the red glove Willow had carried and placed it beside the matching one near the stove. She never let go of this. Sophie touched the white star stitched near the thumb. My dad sewed that on. He said we should always mark things that matter. Hannah ended the radio call and entered the room. Your mother is safe in Bozeman. She has been waiting for news. Sophie's face changed at once. Can I talk to her? Hannah handed over the satellite phone. The signal was weak, but Rachel's voice came through clearly enough. Sophie listened, then smiled through tired tears. I am okay, Mom. Willow found people. The dog's ears lifted at her name. Mason turned toward the window, giving the family a private moment. Snow drifted against the glass, but the forest no longer looked endless. It had a path now. Blue scarf markers. A bridge. A cabin. A dog who had remembered each turn even after cold nearly took the memory from her body. When the call ended, the medic prepared the rescue sled for Sophie. Willow tried to stand and follow, but her legs shook. Mason knelt beside her. Not this time. He lifted the German shepherd carefully and settled her onto a second padded sled. Sophie reached out until her fingers touched the red collar. We go together. The team began the return down the ridge. Hannah led. The deputies managed the safety lines. Mason pulled Willow's sled while the medic stayed beside Sophie. The blue markers guided them through the pines, each strip of cloth now less a sign of fear than proof that a child had believed someone would come. At the bridge, Mason stopped and looked back toward the ridge. Years earlier, another winter search had left him with the feeling that arriving late was a permanent part of who he was. Today, the cold had offered him the same choice in a different form. Wait for certainty, or trust the smallest signal. He looked down at Willow. Her eyes were open, watching Sophie's sled ahead. "You were right," he said. The road was never on the map. Near the well, the team paused so Willow could rest. The broken wooden cover lay beneath the snow, and the toe strap still circled the stone rim. Sophie saw it and went quiet. "She fell in there?" Mason nodded. "And she still held your glove above the water." Sophie climbed carefully from the sled with the medic's help. She knelt beside Willow and pressed her forehead to the dog's. "You did not have to save everything." Willow closed her eyes. Mason looked at the well, then at the child and dog beside it. Some rescues ended when someone was pulled from danger. This one had only ended when they were all brought back to the same place. Hannah touched Mason's shoulder. "Transport is waiting at the road." He nodded and took the sled rope again. As they moved through the trees, Sophie kept one hand on Willow's collar. The two red gloves rested together in her lap. For the first time that day, Willow did not look back. The rescue vehicles reached Bozeman just after dusk, their headlights moving through streets glazed with ice. Sophie was taken to the hospital for observation, while Willow returned to Carter Veterinary Clinic under warmed blankets. Mason followed in his truck, carrying the two red gloves on the passenger seat. He had expected relief to feel lighter. Instead, the silence after the search left him with too much room to remember. At the clinic, Rachel Turner arrived before the team finished unloading. She crossed the parking lot in a borrowed coat, her face pale from hours of waiting. Sophie was brought through the side entrance in a wheelchair, wrapped in a blue hospital blanket. Rachel knelt and held her without speaking. Willow heard Sophie's voice from the treatment room and tried to rise. Evelyn opened the connecting door. Slowly, she said. The German Shepherd stepped forward on unsteady legs, crossed the tile, and rested her head against Sophie's lap. Rachel placed one hand over her mouth. "She brought you back." Sophie shook her head. "We brought each other back." Mason stood near the doorway, the red gloves folded in his hands. He offered them to Rachel. She took them carefully, then looked at him. "You found Willow." "She found me first. Hannah told me about the well." Mason glanced toward the dog. She held one glove above the water the whole time. Rachel pressed the gloves against her chest. Sophie's father stitched those stars before he passed away. He said matching things were harder to lose. Sophie looked down at Willow's collar. "He made the hidden pocket too." Mason turned toward her. "Your father wrote the message?" "He helped me," Sophie said. "He taught me that if Willow ever came back without me, people needed to know where she would go." Rachel sat beside her daughter. "He worked search and rescue before he got sick. The old ranger station was where he trained us to wait during bad weather." Mason looked at the red collar, the waterproof sleeve, and the dog resting beneath Sophie's hand. Nothing about the rescue had been accidental. It had been built from lessons given years earlier by someone who knew he might not always be there to help. Evelyn approached with a chart. "Willow's temperature is stable. She needs rest, fluids, and a few quiet days, but she is going to recover." Sophie leaned over the dog. "You hear that?" Willow's tail moved once against the floor. Rachel closed her eyes. The small motion seemed to release something she had been holding since the previous night. Mason stepped back, ready to leave the family together. Sophie noticed. "Are you going?" "You are safe now." She looked at him with the direct seriousness children sometimes carried after fear. "Willow trusted you." Mason glanced at the dog. "She trusted the glove." "No," Sophie said. "She trusted you to follow." The word stopped him. Years ago, Mason had built a life around the belief that one missed sign defined him. He had accepted quiet work, empty roads, and the comfort of tasks that could not forgive or accuse. Now a 9-year-old girl was telling him that trust had reached him before he was ready to receive it. Hannah entered carrying a folder and a paper cup of coffee. "The volunteer search coordinator wants to speak with you," she said. "They need people who understand winter trails and know how to stay calm around working dogs." Mason almost smiled. "That sounds like recruitment." "It sounds like they noticed what happened today." Rachel looked at him. "Maybe Willow did too. Mason walked to the treatment table and crouched beside the German shepherd. Her amber eyes opened. He rested one hand lightly against the dry fur near her shoulder. "You finished the road," he said. Willow lifted one paw and placed it over the red glove still resting in Sophie's lap. Sophie smiled. "I think she wants you to keep one." Mason shook his head. They belonged together. He placed the second glove beside the first. Matching things were harder to lose. Outside, snow continued to fall over Bozeman, softening tire tracks and covering the roads they had traveled. Inside the clinic, a mother held her child, a girl held her dog, and Mason stood among them without feeling the need to step away. The past had not changed, but for the first time, it no longer seemed like the only road left behind him. 3 weeks later, the snow had begun to loosen its hold on Bozeman. Water moved beneath the ice along the roadside ditches, and the afternoon sun reached the valley with a softer light. Mason stood beside the old stone well with a tool belt around his waist and a county work crew behind him. The broken wooden cover had been removed. In its place sat a steel safety cap anchored into the stone, surrounded by a new split-rail fence painted bright enough to be seen through winter weather. Hannah checked the final bolts while Mason tested the latch twice. "That is not coming loose," she said. "It should have been fixed years ago." "It is fixed now." Mason looked toward the trail where blue fabric markers had once led through the trees. Most were gone, collected after the search, but one strip remained tied to a pine near the ridge. It moved gently in the wind. A vehicle approached along the maintenance road. Rachel stepped out first, followed by Sophie and Willow. The German shepherd wore the same red leather collar, cleaned and softened, with the waterproof pocket repaired by Evelyn. Her coat had regained its shine. Only a small patch of shorter fur near one front leg showed where the clinic had treated her. Sophie wore both red gloves. Matching white stars rested over her hands. Willow saw Mason and moved toward him with steady steps, not running, not pulling, simply certain. Mason crouched as she reached him. She pressed her head against his shoulder. "You look better," he said. Sophie smiled. "She keeps trying to follow every snowplow now. She has opinions about road maintenance. She has opinions about everything." Rachel carried a small wooden sign beneath one arm. Sophie made this with her grandfather's old carving tools. She handed it to Mason. The letters were uneven but careful. Willow's turn. Stay on the marked trail. Beneath the words, Sophie had painted a red glove and a small white star. Mason ran his thumb across the carved edge. "This is good work. Dad used to say signs matter only if people stop long enough to read them," Sophie said. Mason looked at her. He was right. They mounted the sign on the fence beside the well. Sophie tightened the last screw herself. When she stepped back, Willow sat between her and Mason, facing the trail. Hannah arrived carrying a folder. "Before everyone leaves, there is one more thing." She handed the folder to Mason. Inside was an application for the county volunteer search team, along with a training schedule for winter tracking and canine support. His name had already been printed across the top. "You filled this out for me. Only the part one knew. And the rest? That depends on whether you are still hiding behind road barriers." Rachel looked away to give him space, but Sophie did not. She watched him with the same direct expression she had worn in the clinic. Mason read the first page, then looked toward the forest. The trail was quiet now. No storm. No missing footprints. No weak signal buried beneath the wind. For years, he had believed usefulness belonged to the life he had left behind. He had mistaken silence for peace and routine for healing. Willow stepped closer and placed one paw on the folder. Hannah smiled. "That is not legally binding." Mason looked down at the German shepherd. "She does not seem concerned." Sophie removed one glove and offered it to him. "For your first search." Mason did not take it. Instead, he closed her fingers around it. "You keep the pair together." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small red ribbon. It had come from the temporary marker tied near the well on the day of the rescue. He fastened it to the zipper of his tool bag. "I will carry this." Sophie studied it, then nodded. "That works." Mason signed the application against the hood of Hannah's vehicle. The pen moved slowly at first, then firmly. When he finished, Willow gave a quiet huff and leaned against his leg. Hannah took the folder. "Training begins Saturday morning." "What time?" 6. Mason glanced at the rising sun. "Good." Rachel and Sophie walked toward their vehicle, Willow between them. Before climbing in, Sophie turned back. Mason. Yes. She did not just find us. Mason looked at the ribbon on his bag. I know. The vehicle disappeared down the road, leaving shallow tracks in the softening snow. Mason remained beside the new fence while light settled over the stone well, the carved sign, and the trail beyond it. Nothing about the place had been erased. The cold had happened. The fear had happened. But now the road carried something else. A warning. A memory. A beginning. Mason picked up his tools and walked back toward the truck, no longer alone in the life he had chosen. Saturday morning arrived under a clear sky, the kind that made every remaining patch of snow shine blue before sunrise. Mason reached the county search station at 5:45 with the red ribbon tied to his tool bag and a thermos of coffee in one hand. The building stood at the edge of town, simple and quiet, with 2 rescue trucks parked outside and a training field stretching toward the foothills. Hannah was already there, checking equipment beside a row of volunteers. You are early, she said. Old habit. Good one to keep. Mason signed in and listened as the instructor reviewed winter navigation, radio procedure, and canine support. No one treated him like a hero. He was grateful for that. They gave him a map, a compass, and a partner. They expected him to learn. By mid-morning, the team was moving through a marked practice route in the hills, reading tracks that had been placed hours earlier. Mason noticed broken crust near a fence line, a bent grass stem beneath the snow, and a faint change in the wind where the trail passed between 2 ridges. He did not rush. He did not assume. He listened. At noon, the training group returned to the station. A familiar vehicle waited near the gate. Sophie stood beside Rachel, wearing her red gloves. Willow sat at her side in the cleaned leather collar, alert and steady. Mason stopped. I thought visitors came after training. Hannah lifted one shoulder. Some visitors earn exceptions. Sophie walked forward carrying a small paper bag. Mom made sandwiches. Rachel smiled. She insisted everyone who helped should get one. Willow reached Mason first and pressed her nose against the red ribbon on his bag. He crouched beside her. Still checking my gear? The German shepherd gave a quiet huff. Sophie looked toward the training field. Did you find anyone? Only a volunteer pretending to be lost. Did the map help? Mason glanced at Hannah. Some. Sophie waited. And the rest? He rested one hand against Willow's shoulder. The ground told us where to look. Sophie nodded as if that answer mattered. They ate lunch on a wooden bench behind the station while sunlight moved across the valley. Rachel spoke about returning to work. Sophie described how Willow now slept beside the front door whenever snow began to fall. No one mentioned the cabin until Willow placed one paw over Sophie's red glove. Sophie smiled and looked at Mason. She still does that. She remembers. Do you? Mason looked toward the distant ridge. Every day. Sophie seemed worried by the answer, so he continued. But remembering is not the same as being trapped there. She considered this, then leaned against Willow. Dad used to say a trail can take you out, not just in. Mason looked at Rachel. Her eyes had softened, but she said nothing. After lunch, Hannah brought out a small wooden box recovered from the old ranger station during the final cleanup. Inside were a few weathered pencils, an outdated trail map, and a brass nameplate that read Daniel Turner, Volunteer Search and Rescue. Rachel touched the letters gently. Sophie's father. Hannah handed the nameplate to Sophie. We thought it belonged with your family. Sophie held it for a moment, then looked toward the station wall where plaques honored former volunteers. Can his name go there? Hannah nodded. It can. Mason helped fasten the brass plate beneath the others. Sophie stood beside him while Willow watched from below. When the last screw turned tight, morning light caught the worn metal and made the name clear again. Rachel placed one red-gloved hand over her heart. Mason stepped back. The wall did not erase loss. It gave it a place to rest. Before leaving, Sophie opened her hand. Inside was the small white star that had come loose from one glove. For your jacket, she said. Mason almost refused. Then Willow nudged his hand. He accepted the star and tucked it carefully into his chest pocket. I will keep this one. Sophie smiled. Good. Now they are still matching. One star with her, one with him. Outside, the training whistle sounded, calling the volunteers back to the field. Mason looked at Rachel, Sophie, and Willow. I have to go. Sophie nodded. Someone might be waiting. Mason joined the team as they moved toward the foothills. Behind him, Willow gave one soft bark. He turned once and saw her standing beside Sophie. both framed by sunlight and melting snow. Then he faced the trail ahead. Some roads return what was lost. Others return the person we thought we could no longer become.